Hello, welcome to AD 101, week 9. And this week we're going to be covering motivational interviewing and the stages of change. Thank you. So, if we are meeting as a group, we would invite you at this time to go ahead and form groups of maybe two or three people. And what we would like to know from you before we even dive into motivational interviewing is we're talking about change this week. So, what do you believe about change? What is your role in the change process? And why do you believe that people do change? Hmm. Also, the other side of that coin is why do you believe that people are unable or stay in the same space? Lots to ponder. So, take a moment and either think about it on your own or as a group. Thank you. Okay, so let's dive into the primary goals of motivational interviewing. As you can see, the primary goals here are to increase the person's awareness of all aspects of the issue of creating cognitive dissonance. And some of us, I know I had to look up what does cognitive dissonance look like? And the way that I learned it is that there's a discomfort or a disconnection between what my values are versus what I'm actually doing. And so we found this visual of this young man beautifully enjoying his bubble bath with a cigarette in his mouth. So on the one hand, there's so much deliciousness about self-care, and then there's the cigarette. And so that we thought was a perfect example of what that looks like. So basically, cognitive dissonance is the discomfort a person feels when their behavior does not align with their values or beliefs. Cognitive dissonance creates disharmony in our body. And I've also heard it say that if you take the word disease and you break it into two, it's dis-ease. Our body is not at ease. And so when people are in that space where they're talking their big story about how helpful and how it helps me to reduce stress and so forth, and the body is actually experiencing more stress from whatever it is that they're doing that's not matching their values and beliefs. So one really nice response that we can do is we can ask questions like, help me to understand from where you come. And that opens up the door to them feeling heard. And then also, what would our body feel like if it were in harmony? And when I think about our body being in harmony, it goes back to Dr. Mate and how he talks about the mind, the heart, and the gut all need to be aligned in order for our body to experience that harmony. So let's go through this next few. It says elicit interpersonal reasons for change, increase self-esteem, and increase perceived self-efficacy for change. And some of you might be wondering, self-efficacy, what is that? We'll dive into that in just a little bit. We're also going to direct our awareness to the personal dissonance, like increase the likelihood that denial is not evoked. So we don't want to evoke someone and push them further into denial. We want to help ourselves. So this is about us too. We want to help ourselves fully understand how is this behavior or this substance use helpful, and move from there, because then the person feels like, oh, they're not judging me. They're just like accepting me where I'm at. We also do not ever want to force a decision from someone who is not ready to make that decision. And so you're probably wondering, how do I do all this? We're going to go in deep into motivational interviewing, and we'll see exactly how it is. Plus, you know me, I always have my little quirky addition. So this is a story about MI, plus some quirky out of the box ways of looking at ourselves and others. So let's do this. Excuse me. So how do we do this? How we make this like magic Jedi mind trick happen when it comes to helping people or empowering people to make that shift? There are 5 principles to MI. Number 1 is to express empathy. We're also going to develop discrepancy. We're going to avoid arguments. Here. And we're going to roll with resistance and support the self-efficacy that we'll dive into in just a bit. So principle 1 of MI is to express empathy. And expressing empathy truly means accepting people where they are at. In fact, by accepting someone just where they are at is the way that we begin that change. Because when you think about it, as they were children, they were molded into what others needed them to be. So much so that who you have in front of you, the client, the individual, the human that is standing or sitting before you, that's a result of all the messages they received about how they needed to be this or that. And so, therefore, it's so important for us to just accept that the person that's standing in front of us or sitting in front of us is a result of all those messages. So just listening to them, again, asking questions like, help me to understand, especially if it is hard for us to understand. So acceptance also, we have to remember that it doesn't mean that we're agreeing with them or that we're colluding with them. That's just not what the acceptance is about or how it's most helpful. It's more about having them experience being accepted and possibly for the very first time, because if all the messages they have heard are you need to be this or that and never you are so great just the way you are, then they don't even know what that might feel like within themselves. So you might be the first person bringing that out in them. We want to be respectful by listening to the client with a desire to understand their perspective. Again, stepping into their shoes is so, so important. This will also build a working alliance and it'll support the client's self-esteem. The client will feel like, hey, I can be myself around you and it's okay, maybe for the first time. We don't want to judge, we don't want to criticize, we don't want to blame. Oh my gosh, and this is not even about blaming the caregivers that helped shape this person. This is more about letting go of all the judgment, the critical comments, the shame and blame. Instead, we're going to be skillfully using reflective listening. And what's groovy about that is when we're applying that, it's really great because it takes who they are and makes them just right the way they are, where they're at. They don't have to perform. They don't have to look cute. They don't have to do anything for us. They're just being. And then that's kind of like a Jedi, woof, mind-blowing moment when you can just be and be accepted for being just who you are. I mean, how would that feel in our own body? Be great. Okay, principles 2 and 3 of motivational interviewing. One is developing discrepancy. And so let's think about the gentleman in the bathtub, bubbles all around him and a cigarette in his mouth. Think about how the image of that person in this delicious bubble bath with a cigarette in their mouth, their expression on their face in that visual really says it all. Also, let's give acknowledgement to how those behaviors were helpful in the past. The cigarette was helpful in the past, probably while they were in survival mode. Um, or they were experiencing discomfort that the smoking either provided the ability for them to fit in a group or them to escape some emotional suffering. And so those behaviors at one point were useful, and they no longer are. And so developing that discrepancy, I hear you like to run, if only you didn't have to gasp as a result of smoking or something to that effect. Um, and then helping them to understand from where that came from, like those behaviors and that substance use was indeed helpful in the past, and it no longer is needed, effective, or helpful. But we don't have to get there right away. Just so you know, it's just acknowledging how helpful it was, and not making it about how wrong it is. It's more about, hey, how is this stuff helping me, and in what way what would I want to do to change it? So, and just really amplifying those two between their current behaviors and their delicious goals. Okay. One thing we do want to do is we want to avoid any kind of argument. And I'll give you an example. Eric Martin used to tell us that before marijuana was legal, he's like, don't you dare start talking about marijuana, whether it should be legal or not legal, because that's an argument that you will never win. So I like to use that as an example of how we can tell in our bodies when we're touching a topic that is off limits to the person sitting in front of us. And so we need to discern that, and we need to respect that. In due time, that person may be willing to talk about things that are higher stakes for them. But right now, we're listening to them, and we're following their lead about what they want to talk about. So no arguments. And then the word resistance is a sign that something is missing. We need to dig into our understanding of the client's perspective. And again, that's about really truly finding out what floats their boat. And definitely no labels, and avoid good, bad, right, wrong, you know, and use effective, ineffective, helpful, not helpful. Use gentle persuasion and avoid hard, in your face confrontations. And if you can eliminate all of that doesn't work, I guarantee you're going to experience more and more connection with every person that you end up honored to serve. Okay. So this again, principle number 4, which is roll with resistance. It goes back to that idea of not being selective about what areas you want to focus on. Um, yeah, you can follow their lead into what's most important to them, and listen. So perceptions can be shifted. New perceptions can be invented, but not imposed. The client is a valuable source of finding solutions to their own situations. And I can't emphasize that enough. Really trying to find the person's strengths within them and bring those to light, because what happens if the person is now seeing what is great about themselves, it's a way of kind of like opening the door for possibilities. Like my counselor sees me and doesn't run away. They're like right here standing with me. Even when I push back and I hold on to those things that mean so much to me, like the substance or the ineffective behavior, they are steadfast. They are still here. They still believe in me. And there, people start to go like, what? From where did she get that or he get that? I don't even believe in myself, but I guarantee you that the minute that you allow that person to show up, celebrate just that they showed up. That's why we say, squeal, we are so glad that you are here. Because if you're not here, you're out there running and gunning or struggling the usual life difficulties. And so just the fact that our clients show up is already a win. So celebrate right from when they walk through the door. Celebrate that. And then let's come back to this list here. Um, Acknowledge the disagreement if there are disagreements. Just say it sounds like I'm trying to think. There's a I kind of will say, thank you for your opinion. It doesn't mean that I agree with it. It just, I thank them for letting me know how they feel. Thank you for helping me to understand. It doesn't mean we agree with it at all. In fact, it means good for you. And I know I want to say that snide remark. How's that working for you? That wouldn't be a good thing to respond. And we can sometimes feel those things in our body, but we don't express them. Because again, uh, clients have been um, kind of put down most of their lives and been people kind of can highlight or magnify what they do wrong. And so the goal is to not do that. The goal is to celebrate that they showed up, celebrate with whatever small gesture that they do that helps them move in the direction that we want to encourage them to go in and when it comes from within them, oh my gosh, they blossom. So I hope that helps. Oh, it looks like also acknowledge the disagreement, which is one of the ways to do that is to shift our focus. Again, just thank you for your opinion. Emphasize personal choice and control. Yes, and we're going to talk about that when it comes to responsibility. That's a really good topic. And we're going to also describe the ambivalence. So I hear you like to um, play sports. You really remember riding your bike and just having a good time. And at the same time, you lost your bike because you sold it for drugs, and it or you loaned it to someone you didn't trust. And so let's like get into that and find out what that's all about. Or even having them notice, hey, I do like to run, but I notice I'm out of breath most of the time. So that let the clients themselves do their own aha as you're asking them, help me to understand. A lot of times they themselves will go, oh, what they hear themselves saying is probably the most important um, than anybody else telling them, is what we're trying to say here. So that's principle number 4. Okay, so principle number 5, support self-efficacy. Okay, so let's dive in what that word means. Um, so let me see. It says believe in the possibility of change is an important motivator. So the person has to believe. And a lot of times when people show up, they don't even believe that it's possible for change because so much difficulties have occurred. And the other piece to that is the client is responsible for choosing and carrying out personal change. There is hope in the range of alternative approaches available. So one of the things that comes to mind is Dr. Mate's words, and I believe others have said the same thing too. But he uses the word responsibility, and he breaks it up into 2 parts. So what he's trying to say is that responsibility means that we all have the ability to respond. That self-efficacy can also mean we look in and not out. So there is always going to be someone bigger or greater or wealthier out there, and self-efficacy, what's cool about that is that we're not trying to compare ourselves to others. We are actually comparing ourselves to ourselves. And so if I was able to do a yoga stretch, maybe halfway through, if I continue to do this same yoga stretch within just given the time that I invest in myself, I will be able to get closer and closer to achieving the full blown stretch that maybe I'm trying to achieve. And so what we can do is we can celebrate the person as they are, and then notice every little change that and celebrate that as well. And so that's why we have this little doggy saying, "Squeal, your efforts are noticed." Um, and so I hope that helps. So self-efficacy is not the same as self-esteem. It's their perception of their ability to cope with obstacles and succeed in change. Optimism is an important element in efforts of change. It increases clients' perceptions of self-efficacy and self-esteem, and we use the success of others as examples and clients' previous successes as examples. Again, finding their strengths. What are they good at? How have they gotten through these difficult moments in the past? And when it's a positive way an effective way to do it, then we want to tap into what has been working. And again, reminding individuals that the responsibility for change, they have the ability to do that with themselves. So I hope that helps. Yes, we all have the ability to respond. Hi. So this one's one of my favorite because I think of reflective listening as delicious. So, reflective listening is a process to determine that you and the speaker are both on the same page. Yeah, and it's also an energy. You can tell when you are, and you can tell when you're not. Some of the ways that we can make sure that we are showing up using reflective listening skills, we can be attentive, like really look into their eyes, have that delicious eye contact. And that's kind of a tricky one because you have culture that plays a part in it. In some cultures, if you look at someone in the eyes, it's considered disrespectful. And so we also want to take that into consideration. Our nonverbal cues, as somebody shares something that's profound and very dear to their hearts, you want to lean in with your body language. You want to lean in to let them know that you are actually listening attentively. Your posture. This is my friend Jerry. Some of you may know her, and her son. And she gave us permission to use this. But I love this image because you can see in their posture, you can see that they're interested in what the speaker is saying. And that's what reflective listening shows up like. And it's noticeable. If I'm saying, and my body language is like, I'm over here looking at my cell phone, doing all this other stuff, the person is going to get that what they have to say is not important. And we want to emphasize that every piece of information is delicious data, and we want to really honor that for our clients. So I'm yeah, reflective listening is delicious. I hope you enjoy showing up that way as much as people will appreciate you for showing up that way. It's really cool. Okay, so here are some more little insights on exactly how do we perform in a way that people feel it's not a performance. So, how do we show up where we're authentically and genuinely ourselves? Here are some additional ways to do this. And I'm going to point out some of the mm, additional steps that might be helpful. So, number one, summarizing. It's so important to, especially as a person tells their story, to before they get too far into their story, to gently summarize what you heard, like what I hear you saying is, and that way the person will either validate, yes, exactly, or they will go, no, 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 that's not what I meant to say. And that's an opportunity for us to both be on the same page. They will guide us, and we will, if we can allow them to also give us feedback on that we are on the same page or not. Um, as sometimes we can just say, uh-huh, yeah, you're right. Oh, how did that feel? Okay, I could, and then we could also say stuff like, if a person is either tearful or expressing an emotional part of their story, we can kind of guess as to how they might be feeling, and they will quickly let us know that yes, we are spot on, or no, they are feeling this way. There's a little note here on reflective meaning. It says combining content and feelings. So the quote is, from what you're telling me, it sounds like you feel betrayed. And so I wanted to like highlight that because according to Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, betrayed is not a feeling word. It's more of a perception of what you think that person did to you. And really, an example of what betrayed might be is that, I'm, let me see, how do you feel when somebody violates your confidence, especially if it was someone that you love and trust? I may feel guarded, I may feel vulnerable. And it's so important to equip our clients and ourselves, beginning with ourselves, with a list of actual feelings versus interpretations that we make from what other people are saying to us. Another big example is like, oh my gosh, I felt so abandoned. And it's like, according to Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, abandoned is not a feeling word. How do you feel when someone leaves, especially abruptly, without word? Then you can tap into your heart and you can go, I feel sad. And you can see when a person says, I feel sad, their head goes down or their body kind of falls over. And so it's so important to notice that, to really, really tap into that. It's just really big. But the summarizing is so important, especially at the end of your session. Maybe once in between. At the beginning, find out what they would like to focus on the most. And I think we talked about this before. If you give them 10 minutes, just at the beginning of the session, for them to be able to talk about how they're doing, what they're feeling like, and then you can like integrate your topic for that day. We guarantee you that when you do this method, they are more likely to hear the information that you are about to give them if they felt heard and acknowledged for where they're at when they first walked in the room. And so I hope that helps. It's just super duper important. And lastly, avoid close-ended questions. Yeah, those are not helpful at all. Um, like, did you feel happy? Yes or no? Or how did that make you feel? And then that invites a whole lot more conversation. So, got it? So here is a video that we would like for you to please take time out to view. I'm not going to go into it because, quite honestly, I did not watch it just before I did this recording, and I want to get these recordings done. But please do so. It's probably, I'm 100 that it's more delicious information that you'll find helpful. Okay, thank you. The following is a listening skills practice. And so the idea is to get together in a group of three. One person discusses their current progress with their class project. Another person practices using reflective listening, and the third person observes. And then you switch about. Each person rotates roles, 5 minutes to practice and 5 minutes to discuss the experience of what they're going through. maybe provide some feedback somewhere in between there. But we love this doggy because it's like he's so cute. He looks like he's listening. So if we can listen like a pet, we're gonna do great. Okay, so the next topic is the stages of change. The stages of change are super, super important, and they're very embedded into addiction. Um, uh, in fact, there's a video that I show in AD 106 where they talk about the stages of change and Prochaska, the person who created them. But basically, there's pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and relapse. Looks like that's relapse. So yeah, we'll dive into each one of these individually. Thank you. Okay, so pre-contemplation. I think we've all had folks, or we've been in pre-contemplation ourselves. And sometimes what that looks like, it sounds and feels like the person is just not ready. They have like no intention to change, especially in the next 6 months. They have more reasons to stay the same than they do to change. And I'm going to say they appear to have. And if that's the case, then that's honestly where they are at. And they're completely unaware of the benefits that might fall upon them if they were to actually change. They might have like protective, euphoric recall, and diminished self-efficacy going on there. So the word resistant, I'm not a fan of it. A lot of times, what I've heard in certain counselor fields, I've heard that resistance means that it's something within us as well as counselors. Like sometimes we'll have a client and we dread when that client is coming on that particular day, and it's exhausting. We're wiped out when they come in, and we want to check in with ourselves. And so because I truly believe that it's a dual situation. The client does come in with a whole lot on their plate, and the counselor is can also share some of that resistance as well. So with all the love in my heart, I say it's okay. You're going to have situations and clients that bring about those feelings, and if we can just step back, and when people are defensive, perhaps they're being defensive because they're protecting something that has kept them alive and saved them from some really horrific situations. And if we can have that shift within us, that then comes forth the empathy and the help me to understand. Another thing is sometimes people can feel resistant or defensive or protective because they have never in their life felt heard or listened to. They have felt like they don't matter. And so if they come in like a bulldozer and they're bringing all of their, excuse my language, shit with them, and then we too go, then it's just more evidence for them to feel like they don't matter. And it validates their decision to stay in the same space. The other thing, I call it Foss and Foth. You're probably like, what's that, Guadalupe? It's actually fear of success and or fear of failure. A lot of times we we aren't even aware that that could be it, but it could be it. That, oh my gosh, if I'm successful, that's scary because I've never been. And then, oh my gosh, if I try and I fail, that sucks. Why would I bother trying? Or I'll feel really bad if I fail. And so either one of those two can be extremes of fear. And the bottom line of this fear is truly like, if I'm not the person who does that ineffective behavior or uses that substance that is not helpful, then who the heck am I? That has to be scary. If my identity has been built around, substance use, ineffective behaviors, mental health injuries, if you take those layers away from me, then who the heck am I? That's scary. That's scary if we've never experienced that. And so that's a really big, important um, idea, or a big, important part of a person that we have to like get jiggy with. We have to get jiggy with the sadness. We have to get jiggy with the fear. And that's when we do that, then the person is like, feels safe enough to say, hey, I'm afraid. And I don't even know what I'm afraid of. And that's when you say, you celebrate those wins where somebody just is vulnerable and fragile and trusts you. Because what that means is you have created a safe space for them. And that's delicious. Maybe for the first time. So do it because you can. So the next one is contemplation. Ooh, contemplation. Um, that's kind of a really sweet space. It's a sweet space to be in because your foot is kind of in both doors. Like on the one hand, I'm still using, and on the other hand, I'm like ready. I want to make a change. I know that I could start to think about, begin to like ponder, begin to play with the idea of, ooh, I wonder what that would look like. So um, the balance, you're getting more and more balance. Where use used to be up here, and the idea of giving it up was down here. They're starting to come to a more level plane where you have just as many reasons to change as you had against it. And so, and that's called ambivalence. Ambivalence is like two opposing thoughts at one time, and they're both pulling at you. That's ambivalence. And it's okay. It's delicious because you're no longer in pre-contemplation stage of change. You might still lack confidence, like, ooh, I really don't want to do this as I'm doing this, but I want to. I know that my life will get better. And I start playing with those ideas of how life can be better. And when I was teasing about doing this, I was thinking about Eric Martin, which I've talked to you about him before. And he says, and I'll never forget the way he said it. He's like, addiction is the oddest thing. I might be saying I don't want to do this anymore as my physical body is holding the substance, lighting up, and putting it to my lips. It's like there's two parts of us, and the contemplation is now in a place where, yes, I may still be using, and I no longer want to. I've made that internal decision. I haven't taken action, but I've made that delicious decision to do something else. Hmm. Yes, now we're ready. We're ready. We may still be using, but we're in preparation mode now. Now we plan on preparing. I want to be free of this shit, excuse my language, in the next 30 days. So it's getting closer, and we're actually visualizing and asking people for help. Like, how do I do this if I decide to do this? And you have more reasons to change than you do to stay put. You'll be asking for help, maybe finding out what's the next step for me. You might have developed a plan. You might be taking small steps, moving from one space in your life to the new space in your life. And you have also made a commitment to yourself. And that shift from contemplation to preparation, it increases your confidence. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, you're taking a deep dive and you don't even know what you're taking a deep dive into, especially if you've never had the opportunity to be clean and sober. It's the ideal space for a person to be in when they come into treatment, because they're ready, mind and heart are open to receiving information that's going to feed that decision to take action. Woo, it's Christmas. So that's like the grooviest space to be in. Yay, you've arrived. You are now in action stage of change. And it's like this guy throwing off all those boxes saying, okay, I'm done. I'm decided. I'm still going to have stress. I'm still going to have difficulties. I'm still going to have anxiety. And I choose to like do something different because those feelings, they take a while to catch up with our change. And so we'll still have some of those feelings, they'll still be present, but we'll also be focused on what we're doing, the new thing that we're doing to create that change. This is an observable change. It's also the biggest investment of time and energy. That's when we're like really amped up, really excited, and we have the greatest recognition, hopefully, is being showered upon a person who is in this stage. It's just uh, everybody's on board to supporting a person in action stage of change, and hopefully the doors will open. I say hopefully because sometimes that's what makes it hard about making that internal decision. Sometimes not having treatment can be an issue, treatment available, readily available in that moment. But if all goes well, I should say, and if all goes well, the doors will open, and it's time to do this. It's really exciting. The really great part about a person in action stage of change, you will have amazing treatment facilities like, I don't know, Hazelden Springbrook, for example. And then you can have really poopy, I'm not going to name any treatment facilities that I consider poopy, but I know there are some. Um, and a person, when they're in action stage of change, it won't matter which facility they go to because the mindset is solid on I'm going to change. And so this environment that we're around is helpful or not helpful. But when I'm like in this space of I'm going to change, no matter how icky my counselor is or how wonderful my counselor is, it's coming from within me. That's also going to elevate the amount of action and the amount of accomplishment, and of course, the recovery that follows. Okay. Squeal. Now we have maintenance. Maintenance is once we get solid into our recovery. And the word that comes up for me as Mate talks about, the word recover. It's like it's when we recover something, we uncover or we bring about something that was within us the whole time. It's like Dorothy and her red ruby slippers. It was within us the entire time. And so when we're in maintenance, the part of us that was covered up and is now the true self, authentic, genuine person who has shown up, that is how we show up every day. Um, that is who we really are, our authentic selves. Self-efficacy goes up, improved coping skills. See this guy with his broccoli. And then there's a continuous everyday commitment to continue this new lifestyle because we're also at the same time receiving the rewards of this lifestyle. And so, yeah, it's maintenance is delicious. Every stage of change is delicious because we're moving along that path from pre-contemplation to maintenance. It's like, and a point comes up with that. If we skip some of those, like white knuckling is actually supposed to have like a 5% chance of success. So when we white knuckle, we don't go through all of those separate stages of change. So we don't go through pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action. and then maintenance. We skip, we go straight from pre-contemplation, boom, to um, maintenance. And it's like the chances are of sustaining that recovery are greatly diminished. So that's super important to think about too. So going through those stages of change are very, very important. Okay. And then there's relapse. Relapse. Um, it doesn't have to happen, and it's good to know that it can happen. And the other part is if it can happen, it's so important to know that there's different types of relapse. There's a lapse in time, slips. Slips is like a short duration. Maybe I was drinking heavily, was clean and sober, and then one night on a particular occasion, I slipped. I had a drink or two with when I was in either that hungry, angry, lonely, tired mode, and then I quickly picked myself up and I got back on track again. That would be a slip. And then there's a lapse where maybe I spend a week, maybe even two, where I'm drinking again. However, it's not to the extent of what I used to do. But if I continue in this way, I know it's going to lead to that. And so I pick myself up. I go, oh, time out. And then I pick myself up and I realize I got to stop because I know how this story plays out and I know how the outcomes of it. And so that would be a lapse. So we have a slip and then we have a lapse. And if I were to continue during that lapse, it's almost inevitable that I would end up with a full-blown relapse. And it's so important for clients or everyone to know that there's a difference between a slip, lapse, and a relapse. The reason is if I have a slip, I don't have to think, oh man, I just messed up my entire recovery. I might as well just like go for it. That's the only option that I have. Where if I recognize, oh, that was a slip, I can probably pick myself up and start all over again. And so that's why it's important, so important to know that there is a difference. There are different types of situations within the word relapse, and that can be helpful information that might help us to get back on track quicker rather than later when it's a lot harder to get back on track again. So, okay, so the following are the stages of change strategies. But before we go there, we want to make one more point about the stages of change because they appear to run in an order. So, pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and then maintenance, possibly relapse. But they don't actually work exactly in that order. Sometimes we can have our foot in two different spaces. We can be in action and slip all the way back to contemplation and lose our preparation. Or we could be in pre-contemplation and contemplation in different areas of our relationship with these products or these behaviors. And so it's so important that sometimes they're drawn out in a circular, like I start here at pre-contemplation and I go around until I, get into maintenance. But really, other drawings that have been found to be helpful are spirals, where you have a spiral where you can be in more than one stage of change at a time. And so that's also important to get those visuals to be able to see the difference between we can be two things happening at once, and it's okay as long as we're moving forward. It's okay. Awareness is probably the most important situation in that case. So let's go ahead and move on to the stages of change strategies. What we have here is the stages of changes are important in determining appropriate strategies to use. So depending what stage of change our person is in will determine the best strategy for that particular stage of change and that particular person. We're also going to focus on supporting where the client is at, and that we've kind of emphasized that from the beginning of this lesson. It's always so important to take into consideration where the person is at. And given that, we'll continue. Whew. Okay, so pre-contemplation. I believe it says establish rapport and ask for permission and build trust. Throughout our experience with a client, we want to do those things. We want to continually do those things. And I think when a person is in pre-contemplation is especially a necessary ingredient to be able to always ask for permission, always validate and kind of follow our client's lead. And then by doing that, it opens the door for them to take in whatever information that's going to be useful to them. They're more likely to buy in to recovery or to this process. The other thing we want to do is we want to inform them about the risks involved. So I guess an example would be if nothing changes and the use continues or the behavior continues, what might happen? What would be the natural consequences or outcomes? And could they consider like the absolute worst and then what also the consequences that may happen or the outcomes that may happen if they were able to fully engage and buy into this process? How would that play out, those two stories? Like if I'm here now, if I look into the future 5 years from now and I continue to use, what might that look like versus I'm here now and I look into the future 5 years from now and I'm in recovery? How would those two worlds differ? And which one of those would be my chosen or most helpful? And I know that's really hard when people are deep in their use. The last thing they want to consider is because they're so attached to their substance, but and at the same time, little tiny glimpses of what that might look like. I went to a training where they actually they did an assessment on folks and they created these virtual goggles and they were able to fast forward 5 years if that person that did the assessment and was wearing those goggles 5 years into the future of what their life would look like, and in a virtual world they could actually see themselves and how they would be behaving, what they would be saying, how people around them would probably pull away and they would be left alone and suffering and of course in a lot of pain. And then they also, during that assessment, asked them what was important to them. What are the things they would like to accomplish in life? And it was so extremely beautiful because they actually added that to their virtual experience 5 years from now if they did succeed in recovery and they were able to see themselves successfully 5 years from now. And they found that 90% of the participants, which was a really small number, like 20 people, 90% of them actually were able to get into recovery and sustain recovery. So they find that that virtual experience can really be palpable in swaying people to experience the highs and the lows of substance or a successful life. The next one is elicit the client's perception. So a question is like, how is that helpful or help us to understand? So we could literally put on the lens of the client. And by doing so, we're actually stepping in their shoes without judgment, and they're able to feel safe. Like, oh, they didn't go like this when I said that horrible thing I did. I didn't see any judgment in their face or in their tone of voice or their body language. And that's what we want to really work on ourselves is we've seen a lot, and sometimes clients will surprise us, and we can learn to manage a lot of those reactions and work on our ability to respond in a non-judgmental, accepting way. And the other thing that does too, when we say help us to understand, is it creates that clarity we were talking about earlier, and how we can make sure that we're both on the same page, and that also builds rapport and it builds trust between the counselor and the client. Raise doubts or concerns or ask intentional questions. Sometimes when we're hearing a story, one thing that we could do is you can see the pain and the suffering in that client's body and face and how they're showing up, their tone of voice. Something that we can do is we can ask them a simple question like, what's the message you make from that experience? And they might, let's say it's something silly like, and I've talked about this in class before, oh, well, I was a latchkey kid and I would come home and I could see that other families would come home and the whole family was there, and but I wasn't. I just had a key. I came in the house and I felt so lonely and so scared, and there was no like meals, home cooked meals. I had to fend for myself. So they go through this list, and when they go through that list, you can literally see how that impacted their experience. And so, what is the message? Oh, I must not be lovable, because as I peeked out the window, there were other families who were coming home with their kids and the parents, and they were laughing and giggling, and here I am all by myself. And so, a thing we can do is we can empower the client or the person to get a perspective outside of themselves as well as the one, affirm the perspective that they have where it must have felt lonely, validate, oh, that had to be so hard and so isolating, and that would create panic and pain. And what was that like? We could ask them. But then we could also, and maybe invite another, like, is that 100% true that you're not lovable? Or what else was happening with your family? And that's where the stories come out. Well, hey, my parents, they had to work two jobs to make ends meet. And so that's why they weren't home. It wasn't so much that I was not lovable. It's that they had to work harder just to keep a roof over our house. And all of a sudden it takes it outside of them, and they're able to see that the situation is what caused that loneliness and suffering. So I hope that helps. Yeah, so that's one way of examining the discrepancies between the client's perception and what was really going on. They have here others' perceptions. But I like the idea of the situation itself, because I imagine those parents also have a perception, and that would be helpful too to know. And I guess that's where family work would come in handy as well. So that's a whole other topic. Contemplation. Oh my gosh. That's where those virtual goggles come in handy, because yay, we get to kind of, well, first of all, we normalize the situation in that previous scenario where we think we're not lovable, but it's really because our parents have to work two jobs. And the other way that we can normalize that situation is also to say, if you had a little brother or even a child who had to go through what you went through, how would they feel? How would you expect them to feel? coming home alone with a key and having to fend for themselves. Here they're supposed to be children, but instead they're trying to take care of themselves, maybe even preparing dinner for the family when the family gets home from work. So normalizing that their feelings are valid and that any other person in that situation might have the similar feelings. And so that also the ambivalence of I'm not lovable, I must not be lovable, or I'm going to keep using because I must not be lovable. That kind of thing is just when we validate from where the person comes, that has a way of like saying, oh, okay, so what would you say to a child who is coming home by themselves? What would you say to them if they were sitting there next to you? There's also the empty chair practice where there's actually an empty chair and the person can imagine their younger self sitting in that chair. What would the adult self say to the younger self? And that's kind of part of the compassionate inquiry by Dr. Gabor Mate. But the question becomes, what would you say to that young person, your younger version of yourself? And it's most of the people will say, oh, you're going to be okay. They skip over the feelings of how that child might feel. So instead of saying, hey, so help me to understand how you felt, and then that person can just get really raw and describe those gnarly emotions, we tend to skip over it and say it's not your fault and this too shall pass, that kind of a thing. But really, what a person really wants to hear is having someone hear how they really felt. And what that means, you might get sad, you might cry, you might have these like feelings that have been buried for many, many years. And with those feelings coming out into the light of day, it can also bring about some relief and that normalized ambivalence that is much needed. The other thing they have here is help the client tip decisional balances scales towards change. And so this is, I think, where the virtual goggles of being able to see 5 years into the future one way and 5 years into the future another way. I think that to me, oh my gosh, I wish we could do that for all of our clients. And then that would be a motivator. The other one that comes to mind is Michael Sealey, Sealey, I think. Um, he's got a quit smoking hypnosis video, and he talks about being at a crossroad during his hypnosis, being at a crossroad. And if he went 5 years into the future of continuing to smoke, what that would look like. And then he goes as far out as 10 years. And he's talking about yellow fingers. He's talking about being out in the rain. He's talking about his respiratory illnesses. His face is, his skin is aged and his hair is like drabby. So all of the negative stuff. And then he goes into the next part of his hypnosis is taking a different road, like going toward recovery. And he also describes what that would look like. And all of a sudden, he's the one who's no longer smoking. And when it's raining outside, he walks outside to walk to his car and he sees the group of people that he used to smoke with. And he sees them standing out in the rain trying to smoke like away from the building and by the street. And he gets to get in his car and he gets to like drive off and he kind of celebrates what that feeling is like to no longer have to feel chained to the cigarettes. It's really quite amazing. So that reminds me of the virtual goggles as well. And then finally, help clients express self-motivating statements of intent and personal commitment. Well, I think when people are able to look into the future and see the options, then they can also, that is motivation, and they can create a new dialogue around who they really are. We talked about FOSS and FOF, which is fear of success and fear of failure. And what's really groovy is that when we step outside of our comfort zone, that in and of itself can be really scary. And so, and by stepping outside of our comfort zone, that's how we move toward that commitment. If we stay in the comfort zone, we know what we're going to get. If we step outside of the comfort zone, we don't know. And that's scary. But it can also be liberating, because that question of if I'm not a smoker, which is what I've identified as 30 plus years, then who am I? And so that can be really scary and daunting, or that can be really exciting because I get to reinvent myself. And so I'm going to make a commitment to reinvent myself in the healthy way that I want to be, or that I can be, or that watch me be. It's just really can be really rare in a good way. So, yeah, it's exciting. Okay, so preparation. This is a long list. And we want to kind of dive deep. We're just going to make a little blurb on each one of these. Clarify, like first one is clarify goals and strategies. What we would add to this is make sure that it's person-centered, client-centered, that it's about what's important to the client, with the goal being that we're going to cover everything. But if we allow the client to lead, then they're empowered to take ownership over their own recovery. Discover. I had, let's see, what has worked for you in the past, but I see that that's the bottom one. So the other thing that we can do is discover, like, what kinds of stuff do they enjoy? Is it a walk in nature? Is it support groups? What floats their boat? That's what we want to get to. And we do want to offer, with permission, we want to offer advice and expertise. And I hold back a little on that because we want to carefully self-disclose if we are going to self-disclose. Or another way that we can self-disclose is we can say what we have seen other work for other clients is, and then although we're telling our own story about what worked for us, we are also making it about other clients instead of ourself. So, so being cautious about self-disclosure and how to do it and who is it benefiting, you know the drill. Negotiate. So one way to negotiate change or treatment or a plan is to provide a menu of items to focus on. So here we're going to talk about finances, we're going to talk about family, relationships, relationship to the self, a whole bunch of areas that are going to help us to improve our lives. Which one of those would you like to work on first? So again, with the idea that we're going to be working on everything. What activates me? That's what I want to work on, is what activates me, and so forth. And then consider the barriers, like what might get in the way, what has gotten in the way before. Have you had clean time? And then when you had clean time and then you returned to use, what was it that got you there? And how can we explore that a little further? So if it happened in the past, it may come up again. And what if we have a plan or an agreement of what we will do instead? So the next one is promote. So the establishment of support. Yes, we want to do that. And there are so many different avenues for that. It could be at our job, it could be at our church, it could be our spirituality, our values, our friends, our family. There's a whole variety of places that we can explore support. What is it Dr. Mate says? That connection is the antidote to addiction. So those connections are going to be vital to get into recovery and then to sustain the recovery. And then we're also exploring the expectations and the client's role in treatment. A big emphasis is to emphasize that this is a partnership, that everyone brings value, and so therefore it's so important to value each other and also create a safe space and bring in the fact that, hey, as a counselor, I may say something that might hurt you or might cause you discomfort. Let's make an agreement from the get-go that if I ever do or say anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, that you will call me out on it, and I will listen. That's my commitment to you. And then also get some insight on, is there like a safe word, or is there something that that would really activate you? And so just really being truthful about, we're both humans, we make mistakes, and at the same time, this is an opportunity to create a different outcome. Maybe in their experience in life, if they said how they felt, they were punished or shunned for doing that. In this case, we're going to make it very clear that that is not what's going to happen here. If you do or say anything, I will also do my best to visit that, explore that, and come up together. We can come up with a way of like having a different outcome, or what would we like to see happen for both of us, so that we can create a safety bubble, a safe container where you can bring the most hardest stuff to talk about, knowing that we're going to create a safe container to be able to hold that stuff that's really difficult to hold. And then finally, let's see, we're going to find out what worked in the past, which we kind of talked about that already. I guess the only thing I would add is, it is so important to not have a hierarchy, like I'm the counselor and you're the client and I'm going to fix you. That needs to go out the door if we think we're going to be somebody's fixer, because it doesn't work that way. It may work while we're in a partnership together in our office, but that person is not going to take you with them everywhere you go. And so therefore, the best gift we could give someone is the ability to heal themselves and be their own therapist, so to speak. Yeah, and the final thing I might say about that relationship is, I might get super attached to how I got better, and I might want to push it on you because that's how I got better. And I have to keep in mind that nope, 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 it doesn't work like that. There are many ways to get better, and everyone has their own journey. It's so important to have that journey be guided by the person we are honored to serve. Okay, so I hope that helps. Okay, so I want to say one more thing about the previous slide, and that is the idea of creating a treatment plan, um, or a relapse prevention plan. It sounds like something we're trying to avoid, and one of the things to consider is, what if we decided to create an agreement, like make a list of the feelings or the behaviors, or feelings or behaviors that I know are taking me down the wrong path, and then have a group of family or a group of friends who, when they notice those behaviors in me, I give them to call me out on it. I let them know, hey, when you see me do this X, Y, and Z, would you be willing to call me out on it and help me get back on track? So that's creating a team effort, so that you're never doing this alone. And that might be, and having it be an agreement, like, I agree to give you a list of the behaviors that demonstrate that I'm being activated and I'm thinking about returning to use. And would you agree to call me out gently and say, hey, I notice you're doing number 2 or number 5, and then read it out. And that way I can go, oh, poop, you're right, I am. Okay, thank you so much. And then have a plan to get me back on track. So notice the difference. One is relapse prevention plan to keep something from happening. The other one is an agreement set in place that really tells the story from before you go backward to the plan and agreement of what to do to keep you from going backward. And again, it's a team effort. Okay, so moving into action. Yay! What would I say? Squeal. We're not going to spend too much time on this, but I'll just read them real quick. Cognitive positive engagement and reinforce the connection built. So again, connection is the antidote to addiction. So yes, let's build on those. Remind the client of the importance of continuing their engagement. Yes. So action, that's why it's called action. So as long as you're acting in that direction, you're going to continue to see some positive results. And then support realistic view of change. Yeah, I think sometimes we get the rose-colored glasses, and that can be really a big high. And it's like, who needs drugs when we're on that pink cloud? And then all of a sudden, the pink cloud goes away, and we're like, and yeah. So it's so important to even talk about that pink cloud, what that might look like, and how to tell when we're no longer there, and then what to do when that happens. Acknowledge the difficulties, and that's the example of situations that may come up. Life will continue to happen, and it's so important. In the past, we reacted, and now we get to learn to respond. In the past, we had ineffective behaviors that became adaptations to survive. And today we're going to be intentional about how we're going to respond to situations. So help client identify high-risk situations and develop appropriate. They have coping strategies, but I would call them, yes, they're coping strategies at first, but then they become adaptations. After you're in action for a while, I guess that's when you jump into maintenance. Help client determine where they have strong family and social support. Again, that was all about the churches, the AA groups, the NA groups, the going out into nature, the doing yoga, the mindfulness, the touching, putting our bare feet on grass. I mean, there's so many delicious ways that we can reconnect with our own bodies. Yay, we made it to maintenance. So affirm, which means squeal, we've arrived. Yes, and it takes effort, continued effort. So first of all, we want to celebrate, we want to affirm and clients' resolve and their self-efficacy. So now they are noticing within their own body how they like look how far I came, which is really cool. We're also going to help client practice and use new coping skills because they're going to become adaptations. They're going to become a norm, go to. Where in the past I had to, like, with my brain think, oh no, my brain is fighting between doing this or that. It'll just be a natural, I'm going to do that thing that continues my maintenance, that keeps me in maintenance. Maintain supportive contacts. Yes, connection is the antidote to addiction. Develop a relapse prevention plan. Don't call it that. Call it an agreement to self. Operation recovery agreement. Something to that effect. Make it about what you will gain, less than what you're avoiding. Review short and long-term goals. Yes, they're kind of reinforcers. When you have a list like that, what's beautiful is when you achieve a goal, you can check it off. You visually see the progress. It could be a calendar on the wall with important goals you have, and you're just going to map them out. And when you get to that day, you can check it off because, yay, you've done it. And that's what reinforces you to continue and achieve the bigger goals in life. Um, Reinforce small wins. Yes, by doing those itty bitty trackings, it's going to make you feel like all that in a bag of Skittles. Like, I am all that in a bag of Skittles. And that will totally reinforce your commitment to remain in your recovery space. And ooh, relapse. I don't like that word. Reoccurrence, a little better. How about return to use? Whatever that might look like for you, whatever word works for you or works for your person, that's what matters. The number one thing to do is to be empathetic. It's understandable that that can happen, and then use that to discover what led to it and how might we come up with an agreement to prevent it in the future. Emphasize a willingness to resume to the positive change. Again, focus on what we've gained and how that will not be lost because of a slip, a lapse, or even a full-blown relapse. Nobody can take that away from you. I've heard people say, I had 80 days clean and I lost all that. No, you didn't lose it. It's still there. It's still a part of who you are. You may have to start your count again from the beginning, but you have that 1 day plus the 80 days that you had in the past. So you really, it's one way to look at it. You can't unring the bell. If you had the bell of recovery for 50 days, for 1 day, nobody can take that away from you. That's yours to keep. Um, explore the meaning of the relapse. Yeah, dig into it. Find out what caused it. What were the things that, the feelings, the emotions, the situation? Halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. How was I any of those? And what could I do to make sure that doesn't happen again? Remind client that this reoccurrence is a learning opportunity. Exactly. By digging deep, we get to find out, like dissect how it happened in a positive way. Always be positive about it. Like, what can we learn from this situation? And assist the client in finding alternative coping strategies. Again, what was that hiccup or that thing that I just like it just switch just went off, and I followed that path back to the older behaviors, the ineffective behaviors. Understanding that will help us to prevent it in the future. And then maintain supportive and non-judgmental contact for sure. Like, we're humans, we have the free will, and when you add the addiction to it and how our brain is rewired and how that we live in a world that makes it a lot easier to continue to behave in the old way. It reinforces that. There's a lot around us, so we have to work twice as hard to create a world that will support our recovery within a world that is about consumerism, that is about addictions like sugar and coffee and cigarettes. So we're in a bubble, and so really reminding our person we're in a bubble that is meant not to keep us in this safe space. So it's up to us to have a lot of empathy, a lot of self-compassion, a lot of love, so that we can sustain that healthy environment. And as that happens, we notice less the world we live in, and we create the world. What does Mate say? Before our mind created the world created our mind. Just think about that. That's powerful. And so if whatever mind we have today is a result of the world, but we're still living in that world. So now we have to work on our mind to create the world we want to live in. Ooh, sounds like a tall order, but I think it could be done. What do you think? Here are some things to remember. I don't know that I agree with all of them, but I'm going to read them for you anyway. it is possible to be stuck in one stage of change. And I want to pause there for a minute because Dr. Daniel Amen actually had a patient who got stuck on suicide. And that's all he could think about. He had a lot, he was a police officer, I believe, and he had a lot of accidents. So he was in tremendous pain, a lot of chasing down people, getting into crashes, and it took a toll on his body. So he was in a lot of pain to the point that he was suicidal. And so Dr. Amen scanned his brain and found that there was a part of his brain that was literally stuck, kind of like when you have a car that has the drive, reverse, and park, neutral, those gears. Well, he got stuck on suicide. And so by scanning the brain and figuring out that his anterior cingulate gyrus was stuck, he was able to provide, I don't know if it was prescriptions or it could have been, let me see, my brain is tired, um, it, or supplements, either one of those, or some sort of therapy. He was able to get it unstuck, but he didn't hear from him for a while. And so Dr. Amen got scared and thought, oh my gosh, what if he suicided? So he picked up the phone and called him. And when he did that, he answered the phone and the man was fine. And so he's like, hey, so help me to understand what happened. And he said, well, I feel a lot better. And he asked him, so, and you're alive? And he says, yeah. He says, I still have thoughts of suicide. I'm able to like do stuff to help me move away from them. Like when they do pop up every now and then. And the pain as well, he's able to shift gears out of those two modes. And that was quite interesting. So part of this idea is of helping someone when they're stuck is helping them to understand that our brains sometimes can have a malfunction. And so and we're not practicing outside of our scope, but we can encourage that because of that knowledge, we can encourage them to see their doctor and to tell them, hey, I'm really stuck in this situation. And perhaps there's some supplement or some prescription or some therapy that might be helpful to them. So that's something really cool, especially if we work in an environment where there's a medical unit and a doctor, dual diagnosis. It's so important to communicate with the different departments to let them know, hey, this person is really stuck. Could there be something more? And again, always not practicing outside of our scope, but having that knowledge of what might be causing people to be stuck is also helpful, just to point them in the right direction. Relapse is a normal part of the change process. Yeah, okay. That's one that I'm not 100, so I'm not going to speak on it. You can help influence movement from one stage to the other. Yes, and with some of the ways that we talked about, like what's worked in the past, what would the outcome be if you do continue to change, or if you keep moving in this direction, what would be the benefits? That's really important also to help people, influence them to move from one stage of change to the other. So, whew, it's a lot, and we can do it. Okay, so now we're going to dive into strengths and perspectives. What does all this mean? What the heck? What do we do with this? What does it look like? Let's go ahead and jump right in to our first method. So, hi. So the first method, or the first part of this next section, is the deficit cycle. And oh, it's my least favorite. And the reason is because when we're in a deficit cycle, we tend to focus on what is wrong with us, what's broken. We put labels, we have negative expectations. It's almost like we have a lens of yuck. Um, we, any interventions or any opportunities are like blocked if we're in that negative or deficit cycle. We have a negative experience. We have lower expectations. And we have, if we do have labels, it's about I'm bad, I suck, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy. All of these really tragic perceptions of ourself or others. So that's an example of that. Okay, so it appears that shifting our focus is going to be the next step. So obviously change is needed, and this is a strength-based cycle instead of the deficit cycle. And so we're going to identify our strengths first of all, like what is good about me? Even though I had a really rough time, it's like what was good about that rough time? Continued development of strengths and capacities. So maybe self-awareness around what our person's strengths are, and even in the negative there's probably a strength. Like if I was cautious, like hyper cautious, well, that could be a strength in the sense that I am being careful and I'm less likely to get hurt. The negative side of that is I might not even let people who are trustworthy in, but it's still a positive until it's not. And so, positive and valued, meaningful experience. So, when we switch our focus to identifying our strengths, we continue to develop our strengths and capacities, and it leads us to positive and valued, meaningful experiences. So I'm looking at this lens now through positive glasses. And so, and then I notice there's more opportunities provided for the successful development. Doors open magically, and there's positive expectations. And then I continue to identify more strengths within me. So it's kind of like a ripple of deliciousness. Anyway, so yeah, that's like the place to be, and because we're worthy. Okay, we talked about strengths. What are the strengths? And so this is definitely a strength-based approach, and the benefits that come with that strength-based approach. We can help the person focus on trusting, having meaningfulness and in their life and in their relationships. We're empowering, not fixing. We're empowering people to take the lead in their own care, because our biggest goal is for them to become their own therapists. We're going to be working in collaboration. So again, we're a partnership. It's not me up here and you down here. No, it's a partnership. When you win, I win, and we all win. Drawing on clients' personal resources, motivation, and hope. Yes, because when we focus on who they are, their experience, what they want, they feel seen and heard. And maybe for the first time, they're like, oh my gosh, my counselor gets me. Oh, and then they can get themselves in the process. It's really cool. Creating sustainable change through learning and experiential growth. That's beautiful, because what I'm thinking of is I'm thinking of positive, or what is it, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's one uh, that's one difficulty that puts us in survival mode. But when you think about post-traumatic growth, it's like, hey, how did this really awful situation, how did it help me to grow in some way? And that's a whole other theory, but it's just there's growth in all of our experiences when we're in like, I would say, safety first, creating that safe space to have the ability to dig deep into those difficult experiences and finding how that experience has helped me to become the person I am today. And it's just really remarkable. And finally, we have a strength-based approach film for you to watch. So Take your time, watch it. Hopefully, our conversation tonight helped. And I will see you at the next slide. Okay, thank you so much. And I look forward to all of your feedback, questions, comments, and feedback. I look forward to it all. See you next week. Thank you.